Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have with me a very special guest, Nick Martell. Nick, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Excellent. I feel like I can't talk today. I've been teaching and coaching all week, and I've been talking. We have a IthiCon. I'm in Ithaca, New York, so we're at Cornell University, so we got a big Comic-Con here tomorrow. So we've been
Oh, wow. That's
planning,
exciting.
and I got new business cards and everything to hand out. Hopefully we'll get some comic artists and writers and just some different people for the summer and stuff. But I feel like I've talked like 4 times as much as normal. So my wife's like, "You're gonna be able to do this?" I said, "Yeah, you're not home." So I said, "You can't ask the questions." So I said, we're gonna get these in. Just so our audience knows, this is gonna be episode 1 for season 2. So we're really excited, that we're able to do this today. And I've been seeing your books for quite a while, so I'm like really, really excited. I can't tell you how many times people shared your book 1. I think it's probably about a month or 2 ago. Like book 1 and 2. Like I feel like I saw you like everywhere. So that was like really cool.
Yeah. I got one of the one of the nice things is that my first book came out literally the worst possible timing during the pandemic. Like not even like at the near the end of it. Literally, it was like, oh, it's May of 2020 it came out, and then it got delayed into June, the hardcover. But it's been lucky enough that I've been really happy that a lot of people have been like, wow, let's like help this dude out who got kind of thrown under the bus a bit. So I'm really always happy when people get to see my covers because I'm like, oh, you've seen me, you know me. This is so wonderful. Even if you don't read the books, that makes me happy.
Yeah. I just thought it was so funny because I was like, oh, there's Nick. And I was like, oh, there's Nick. And then like a day after that, I was like, Nick's everywhere. I wanted to make like a really funny video of it. Like you're literally your book cover,
Just
like reading
everywhere.
Rainbow. Yeah, like just coming in, like I'm trying to escape it and I can't. But yeah, it was really awesome. I said to my friend, he's like, you gotta have this guy. And he's like, I see him everywhere. I'm like, yeah, I totally agree. So we'll start with that first question there. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Yeah, so I started. I actually got put into an ESL program when I was young because
Okay.
I'm initially from Canada,
Oh,
and
okay.
I moved to New York when I was younger. And when I first got to New York, I couldn't understand their accents, so I got put into
That's
ESL.
fair.
And along yeah, I know, right? Coffee, and I couldn't
Yeah,
just it
yeah.
was too thick, couldn't understand it. I got put into an ESL program, and then I eventually got out of it because they realized quickly that I could speak English, and I was understanding what people were saying. I just couldn't understand their accents. But from there, I didn't really like reading or writing. I thought, well, I'm bad at this. Why would I want to, keep doing it? And then I read this book called Frindle by Andrew Clements.
Oh man.
Yeah, you know it. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful book. It's amazing. And without that book, I don't become a writer. Like plain
Mm.
and simple. I love that book. Started reading all the books he had written, and then I think there comes a natural point where I think everyone's like, if you read enough, you're like, I want to write books too. And that's what I did. I just wrote a book, and then there was no one who taught me how to write a book. You just kind of do it, and I kept doing it. And this was when I was in like 4th or 5th grade because I thought I was like the greatest person. I'm like, I can write a book. Well, it took me 2 years. It was terrible. The worst book I've ever seen, worst book I'll ever see. And then ever since then, I just wrote a book every 2 years
Oh, cool.
until eventually I, sent one out to an agent, and he said, okay, this is good. We can publish this. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, this is actually pretty good. And I was like, okay. And I got an agent, got a publisher, and here I am.
That's awesome. It's really funny that you said that because I just feel like so many people I've interviewed the later part of season 1 said the same thing. They're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I wrote this book when I was, 10, 11 or whatever. Maybe they came back to it later, something like that. But yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
funny.
I think it just comes from a love of reading. Really what it
Yeah.
does is that you read so much and you experience so many different things. You want to like, well, I want to create too. And then you just start creating it bit by bit by bit by bit. And the next thing you know, you're like, oh, I have a book. Is it good? Likely not. I think I can count. I don't even know if I know any people whose first book they ever wrote sold, except I really actually don't think I know anyone, but there's probably someone out there who's like, I'm a New
Yeah.
York Times bestseller with my first book. And I'll be like, lightning strikes once, or,
Yeah.
but that's what I think it is. You just keep reading, you keep writing, and then eventually you're just like, okay, how do I get this published? And then that's where the hard part begins.
Yeah, the real work.
Yeah.
Yeah, amen. My friend asked me the other day, he's like, so how's your first book coming? I was like, I'm writing something else right now. I was like, I need to figure out this thing before I can figure out how to go back and fix it. And he's like, yeah, now he's like, yeah, you thought the hard part, right? I was like, yeah, that was not the hard part. Because I got to like the first plateau and I looked up, I was like, holy crap.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
next one. So yeah,
That's one of
awesome.
the fun. Yeah, that's one of the annoying things about publishing is the goalposts always change. You're like, oh, I did this. Okay.
Yep.
And you look, you're like, okay, there's another thing. And next thing you know, it's always changing.
It's so funny you say that because that's what Michael R. Fletcher said too, is like the goalposts. So when I had him on, he talked about that too. And I think I remember if it was like Stephen King or who, but like I remember listening to a podcast where one of them talked about that too. And I thought, well, if Stephen King says his goalposts always move, like I guess that that's just how it's supposed to be. And so it's it means you're evolving though, right? And it means hopefully your books are, you're writing.
Yeah.
So.
And sometimes it's as simple as I remember where my first goal, and I think a lot of writers' first goal is I want an agent. Once they write a book, they're like, I want to get an agent. And then once you have the agent, you're like, okay, I want to sell to a publisher. And then you're like, you sell to a publisher, you're like, okay, I want to, be able to finish my second book without too much hassle. Or like, I just want to sell a second book depending on how the contracts go. Yeah. And I hate publishing and love publishing for the simple reasons that because the goalposts are all changing, it's really hard sometimes to look back and be like, oh yeah, I did kind of do some impressive things. My wonderful girlfriend likes to remind me every so often where she's like, Nick, what are you talking about? You wanted me to list off things you've done that's cool. And I'm like, yeah, okay, fair. But it's like you said, the goalposts are changing constantly. And it's kind of a hard thing to look back on and be like, oh, I've done pretty far. I've done some cool things.
Yeah. And I, one thing I think is cool is like, how old are you?
I'm 28 right now.
Yeah, that's you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so when you published your first book, how old were you? That was a couple years ago, right?
So yeah, my first book published when I was 26, but I sold it when I was 23.
Yeah, and I saw that and I was like, that's impressive. Like you remind me of like Christopher Polini, in terms of Aragorn that way. Like that's what my friend, he was like, you gotta check this kid out. And I'm like, all right. And I was, I was looking, so I started following you on Twitter a few years ago. And then, it's cool for me. This is why I do the podcast too, is like, it's cool for me to see people like yourself. Like I went to the Poison Pen in Arizona, in Scottsdale, 7 or 8 years ago. And we're talking like Brandon Sanderson had just published Way of Kings. He still wasn't a household name yet. Patrick had just came out with In the Name of the Whim. So I met those two, Kevin Hearn, who was already a giant at that time and was like book 7 or something out of like 10 for Iron Druid Chronicles. But, I met, Brian McCullen when he had just started, and Michael J. Sullivan he was on book 3, and look at all of them now, so, like you, it's interesting, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like most people don't do that at 23. So I just think, you got a trilogy under your belt now, right? And I mean, that's pretty successful. So
I like to say my claim to fame is I once met George R. Martin and he looks me up and down. He looks me up and down and he's like, baby author. And I'm just like, I'm like, you're not wrong, but like, oh man.
Should have looked at him like grandpa author.
Yeah.
Be like, I'll be the Frodo to your Gandalf, Like.
Exactly. But it's it's been a thing. Like I've spent my 20s writing books, which is kind of cool. Yeah. They've been published, which is awesome. But I love it. I want to keep doing this. I want to keep writing books, and that's it.
Yeah, I'm just excited to see where you go. From here, like you got a trilogy under your belt, and and I mean, I've seen it. Like I said, I've seen a lot of people share your books. Particularly, I don't know. Honestly, Nick, if I've seen more people share your book 1 or book 2, I'm not sure. Like it's been a lot.
It's the covers. It's the covers. Like I like to think the books are good, but those covers I love them. I'm like every day I'm like, wow, I got those cool covers. Like that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, they're great covers, but don't get me wrong, they're fabulous covers. I see a lot of them. They're fabulous. They do, I think, exactly what your blurbs say that they should do. But I haven't just seen people share book covers. I've seen people share reviews, and hey, I love this line, so it's the writing too. I just want to say like I usually I see people to share book covers, like no offense to anybody, I'll see them, whatever, but I've seen a lot of people share, maybe like a line or two, they don't want to share too much because they want people to buy your book, but they've been really captivated by your writing and your characters. So you're obviously doing something right, because I see it a lot. So
yeah, and I like to. It's this. I guess this goes back to the whole journey part where I told you, like, I'm done the trilogy. I haven't touched it. It's coming out in November. And technically, like, as you know, like, books sometimes have such a long tail run.
Oh yeah, yeah.
When I finished that book, like the first draft of it, sent it off to my editors, that was last April.
Yeah.
And then I eventually go through edits and stuff, and then various delays caused this book to get delayed until November. So the thing that gets me right now is that my current writing style is, I had a year to do whatever I wanted, and I just kept changing my writing style, and my style is no longer what it was when I was writing these books. And it's fascinating. Like, you grow so rapidly as a writer the more you write, and hopefully people like this new style too.
yeah it'd just be interesting for me. Like, I study a lot of authors, particularly now with careers and things, and like I'm trying just to bust out my first 3 books, let alone like first trilogy. But like they always say, like book 4 is where people really hit their stride. So I'm anxious to read yours and see really where you go with book 4, because that's when people are really like, you really hit the ground running at that point. So I think it'll be really, really exciting for you. So I'm looking forward to the career climb, if you will. I hope it's an elevator. So
thank you. I like to think it's the athlete in me, where it's like, okay, I look at this part of this book, what did I do right, what did I do wrong? It's like training. You're like, let me try it again.
Yeah, no, totally. So so your current genre you're writing in is fantasy, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, why fantasy?
I think it was just
what draws you in?
I think it was just the first thing that captivated me as a kid. Like, I wish I had a better answer, but I told you I read Frindle, and then the next thing I started reading was, I read, like you said, Christopher Paolini, Aragon. That was a big book. There's a lot for so many people read that book, even if they weren't fantasy fans. And then I read stuff like Orson Scott Card. This was before I started reading. I started reading a little bit before Brandon or Patrick or any of those guys like really became like household names, even just like publishing. I still remember buying actually the Wiseman Sphere in hardcover when I was in high school, and I was reading it in the class between classes, because like, I want to keep reading this. But I just kept reading fantasy, and there's so much fantasy out. What was another one? Del Toro Quest. I always forget the author's name.
Oh man, those covers.
I love them. Those books,
it is
were amazing. I always forget the author's name. I'm so sorry every time I do it. Because those books mean so much to me. So it was just what captivated me, and I think you just keep writing it. Like, I'm like, all right, let me put a dragon in. Let me put some weird sword things. And the more I read of fantasy, I think it's kind of a natural, I wouldn't say counter, but you kind of, what you read influences what you want to write. And then you kind of look at the genre and you're like, well, this is what the genre is doing. What would I do differently? And kind of change it a bit. And that's what the Kingdom of Liars, Two-Faced Queen, and Voyage were really kind of things like, well, this is what I would do, or this is what I think fantasy should be, or should counter into, or what haven't been done before. And that's and it's also, you get to do really cool things in fantasy.
I was teasing my friend because he writes fiction, and I keep teasing him. He's like, I got this and that going on, and he's like, you had to stop writing. It's like the war in Ukraine is really getting to me, because he's got kind of like a similar story with refugees and different things. And he's like, I just need to take a break. And I'm like, write something different. Like, write a fantasy. And he's like, I get it now, because I tell him, I'm like, I work with children. I see crappy things all the time, unfortunately, with working with them and families and stuff, and it's not always great, and I'm like, the last thing I want to do is write more about what I have to deal with every day. Like, writing fantasy or sci-fi, even horror or whatever, a mix, I feel like, is a nice escape, and you can still use your real life things, but you get to make sure that the heroes win, at least most of the time, or whatever your writing style. But and there's you get to go to far off cool places and meet cool people, and it's more fun. I mean, look, I got War Duke, for crying out loud.
No, I understand. I get it.
I totally understand that. That's funny. For that third one there, so what is the legacy of the Mercenary Kings about?
I never know how to answer this question because
It's the hardest question. You just wrote 3 books on it, bud. Now you got to come up with one thing.
Yeah. I like to say the books were always about the main character, Michael Kingman, where when I was reading a lot of fantasy growing up, I really wanted to see a different take on the way I introduce is like, what happens if Harry Potter's father was Merlin and grandfather was Gandalf and so on? Like, what happens to the kid of Harry Potter when they're like, everyone above them are all these amazing mythical creatures, and then you're kind of the failure? Like, what happens to your psyche and stuff, and what happens to the world if, like, around you, if you're meant to be this hero and you're not? So Michael, and by extension, is kind of that, like, what happens to this kid if he's meant to be amazing and he turns out he's kind of a little villainous. He's kind of not the best person. And then I threw it into a world where I always say this is the cockiest thing I say when writing, where I wanted to try to come up something worse than death, because when I was reading novels, I got really annoyed where I'm like, oh, the worst thing an author can do sometimes is kill off the character I love. Is there something they can do that's worse? And to me, what was worse was destroying these characters and reducing them down to nothing if you took away their memories. Ooh. So how do memories influence people? And that was kind of how Michael was born, and it's Michael's story and how legacies are born and how they affect the world around them and the people around them. And that's about as unspoiler-iffy I can go without saying how book 3 ends or anything. As we get after book 3 is out, I'll tell you everything about why it happened.
I think that's great though. That draws me in. I know I grabbed book 1 I think it was like last summer or something like that. Now I started writing a bunch, so I just I try, but I'm like kind of book drunk, like I'm just like, I'm like, I get home, and it's like pandemic's been crazy. So, I'm like with all the kids, I'm like writing words for hours and then doing more words. I'm like, I've usually never been a TV guy. And now I'm starting to be a TV guy, but I think it's because I'm getting stories in a different medium. My brain needs that, but I'm taking the summer off because I'm like, I want to make sure I'm writing, but I also want to make sure I'm reading enough. So
yeah, that's the big thing where you stop reading, because I didn't realize what was happening. Like you said, you're like book drunk, but it's also because you read your own writing so much
over and over. Yeah.
And then you realize if you say you spend a day writing, you're probably reading, let's say 200, 300 pages, just like going, if you're just straight writing, just looking back and doing stuff, you're reading almost a novel a day of just your own writing. So
yeah. Well, it's hard too, because totally. I think it's difficult, too, when you're like, you're sitting down, and I know Rob J. Hayes talks about this. I'm probably gonna talk about it when I have him on next month, where he's like, I get guilty. He's like, I was feeling guilty. He's getting better at it, but that's what I've been lately. I'm like trying to read the Lee Child, Jack Reacher books, and I keep getting into one, and then I'm like, I feel guilty, so I go back and go write, or it gives me an idea and I go write, and I haven't finished very much this year, but I finished, quite a few things. I got quite a few short stories and stuff about to be done, but it's like, I haven't finished reading my books. And, at a certain point, I think it's like you said, where if you read enough, if you could, read enough, I think eventually you're just like, I want to experience people reading my books the way I have, like you said, like you've enjoyed, some authors, really, like Ursula K. Le Guin for me, Wizard of Earthsea.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like that was like freshman year of me for high school. And I wish I could go back and do it again,
No, I get it. There's some books you wish you could just like wipe your mind out. Yep. Like, let me do this again.
Yep. And that's what's fun for me is like, I have a huge library in my classroom, and I have extra books for kids, like ones I really liked and copies. A girl picked up that book the other day, the first one, and I was like, oh my gosh. I said, to go back in time and, read it again to be you. She came in, she goes, yeah, I need book 2. I finished it last night. I was like, I was just like, maybe like 3 hours, maybe. She goes, I had to do some homework. I'm like, holy moly, but I get it. That's how I was. So yeah, but I think you described, your character really well, to the point where that is intriguing. So I hope that the audience finds that as intriguing as I do, because I think that's a really good way to describe him. So
I love to say, even if you love or hate Michael, you will remember him. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like that's my favorite thing, is everyone who has an opinion on him It's never the same. Everyone has an opinion.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So for the next question, I'm just curious because, like now I'm getting a lot more people who have just finished trilogies, or series. How did it feel writing book 2 and 3 versus book 1? Like, what were some of the differences that you noticed in your writing journey, or just in terms of your ability? Did you find, book 3 was easier? Some people find book 3 to be harder, particularly finishing a trilogy. What was your experience with that, just in general?
Well, I was one of the lucky writers who books. My second book was my easiest book to write.
Ooh.
Yeah, I got cursed out by one or two authors, jokingly, obviously, but they were like, I hate you, Nick, because second book literally was the easiest book I wrote. Third was the hardest for me for a variety of reasons. But part of that was the book I mainly wrote during the pandemic, and I think no one was doing really the best, not best writing, but no one was doing their peak efficiency writing during the pandemic. So it's hard, but also the book was just a pain in the butt, like for a variety of reasons. Yeah. So that's how it was for me. The first book was probably the second hardest book I wrote, for a variety of reasons. That book, I was not a good enough writer to write it when I tried to write it. I kept just trying to write it over and over and over again, eventually till I got it right. But a lot of it was just painful learning of, oh, I can't do that. Okay, how do I do this? How do I do that? But yeah, I enjoyed it. I learned a lot from writing all three of the books, just varying degrees of difficulty and what worked and what didn't work. But it was fun.
Yeah.
I still am lucky the second book was so easy. That was nice getting a second book in. And my editors joked that they're like, wow, you actually hit the deadline for book 2. You know how rare that is? And I was like, thanks. I was like, this is, and then sure enough, when my book 3 came in, I was like, I needed a little more time to finish it. And they were like, you should have done this with book 2. And I was like, what? And they were like, joking. You're fine.
Yeah.
Here's some more time. And I was like, thanks.
Well, that's pretty cool that the Two-Faced Queen for you was kind of like your Empire Strikes Back, like.
Oh yeah, I love that. Like if you have the book, that the quote Kirk has put on is plastered everywhere. It's like the future of epic fantasy, and you're just like, what? When I got that, I was losing it. I was still to this day. I think that's one of the nicest blurbs or quotes or reviews I've ever gotten of a book. It's nice, but it was my Emperor Strikes Back, and I love that book. That book will always hold a special place in my heart just because of a lot of things behind it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's super cool. My friend, she blew it up. I'll have to have her send you a picture. She like blew it up. She's like, I just love this cover. I just love this book. She's like, I just love it. I'm like, okay. I'm like, that's fair. I'm like, and I get it because I'm like, there are a couple like Rob J. Hayes is like Never Die, and my friend Richard Brenning's The Hellboard King. Both of those, I told Chris, I was like, I'm gonna blow that sucker up for book 1 and 2, and then I'm gonna meet him in Wisconsin where he lives because my family lives in Michigan. So I'm gonna road trip there and then road trip over. And he's like, yeah, we'll hang out, talk about writing, and do this and that. And so he's gonna sign them for me. So I can't wait to just like have my basement layer, just full of book covers that I love. But she's like, this is really cool.
That second book cover is actually incredibly fascinating to me because like I said, I wasn't able to do much because of the pandemic. So both those books came out when bookstores really went open. So the first time I got to actually like sit in front of a table and sign books for people, I was shocked on how different people were drawn to each of the covers differently. And the Two-Faced Queen almost caught everyone. Even the people who were like, I don't read fantasy, and I look at it and be like, oh, that's cool. And I'd be like, thank you. But it's fascinating how kind of like what catches people's eye and what doesn't. So
we were just talking about that cover. I guess it wasn't just for me, it was just like a few episodes ago, but really it was like a long time ago now, like October. But I think it was either Mallory Kuhn and I, or one of the other ones, one of the other female authors I interviewed for February, she wrote, but we were talking about, that cover and how it really does just draw you in. It's not, how do I want to, it's not too fantasy, but it's fantasy enough, and it's like, it's very middle of the road, but it really is still so captivating that, it draws you in. And we were discussing that, and it's like, I think it's a good marketing strategy personally, like.
Oh yeah, I could talk about that cover for a long time just because how much I learned based off of it.
Mm,
Because one of the things we realized is that women readers really picked out a book up more than anyone else, which is something like we thought that would happen with the moon. Like the moon is just very fantasy, but it kind of attracted everyone. But that cover, particularly with the queen, like just attracted women
yeah,
particularly, and it was so fascinating. Just because like I think it's a beautiful cover. Like I'm
yeah.
obviously incredibly biased,
No,
but
it's gorgeous. It
uh,
really is. It really is a
yeah,
gorgeous cover.
and everything about it was when usually when we get sent covers, they'll suddenly be like, all right, here it is, and that was the only cover where I think we were like, I only have one question about it, and it was something that my editor themselves like, yeah, we got to change that. I'm already on it, but I pretty much that book cover was pretty much accepted. Like, all right, the dude nailed it out of the park, 100%. Like, don't
Yeah,
don't touch it. Don't change a single thing about it. It's so captivating, but the position, the crown,
yeah,
the throne, everything about it. But
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah. No,
very
it's really
lucky. That's
good.
why I keep saying I'm lucky.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So for I'm sorry, so I keep forgetting for Spotify. So for everybody who's on Spotify or RSS.com, so Nick's book 2 in the Legacy of the Mercenary Kings, the one we're talking about is the Two-Faced Queen. So if you have not seen it yet, obviously make sure you click on the description here. All of Nick's socials and Goodreads and everything will be in the description. So when it's safe from driving, make sure you click on it and check out that cover for the Two-Faced Queen and put them all on your Goodreads. Yeah, but I mean, I think that's a great cover. I think
Yeah.
I just looked at a statistic for Amazon recently, and we've been looking at our analytics for who's listening and stuff, men versus women or whatever. And it's just funny where 65% of women are going to be your Kindle fantasy Kindle readers. So it's like I feel like that was another really good tactic, and that's
Yeah.
where I've noticed certain people, when they do like maybe one guy and then two girls, or something, in terms of mixing it up a little bit. I've noticed that, I just think there's more women that read fantasy
Sure.
than sci-fi. And I think that, people don't really take it into account. And I think there's a lot of women who also, do a lot of reading in fantasy and then, our book reviewing.
Mhm.
So I think it was cool for them because it was cool for a couple of my friends. So I just want to compliment you that they like saw themselves on that cover, and
Yeah.
that's what they felt. And I just thought
And
that was really cool. So,
and this is I don't know if it's like spoilery. The queen is my favorite character in the entire
oh, that's
series.
cool.
So like when she got put onto the cover, it wasn't really an issue of like sometimes I go back and forth. I'm like, all right, what's the cover of these books? My editor will be like, oh, what about this or this? But for those covers, both my editors were like, no, we're putting the queen on the cover. Like this isn't an option. I'm like, all right, like it's called Two-Faced Queen. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But she actually is my favorite character in the entire series for
Oh,
a
that's
variety
cool.
of reasons. So I'm always happy when people say they like her, resonate with her, because it's
Oh,
just
that's
like
cool.
I did my job. You're liking my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah,
character.
yeah. Clearly did it well. I've had 5 different female authors tell me that that she's their favorite character and book
Thanks.
2 is their favorite. And and I was like, well,
Yeah.
book 3 is coming out, so I was like, buckle in.
Yeah, that's fun. That's gonna be a fun one for people.
Yeah, yeah. For that 5th one there. So you plan on just writing the 3 books then for this trilogy then? Do you plan on doing more in this world and with these characters, or did you do what Papa Martin said and just kill them all off? Like
I can't answer the last question.
that's fair. That's fair.
I guess I can, but it's kind of complicated.
No,
But
that's fair. That's fair.
yeah, it was interesting. The book series was actually meant to be 5.
Okay.
For a variety of reasons, I cannot write my 4th and 5th book of that series next.
Mm,
It is not in my control,
mm,
and this is one of those things that sucks as a writer. But I plan to return to them at some point
oh,
one
cool.
day, and I've talked to my agents and editor how I would return to it. It'd
Mm,
be because we are selling this as the end of a trilogy. It still is the end of the 3rd book that I always envisioned. We'd probably just wrap up the series and world as a whole with another trilogy or a 4 and a
okay.
5 duology. Um, but it is still a very fitting conclusion. It's weird. The people understand why I'm talking weird the moment you open book 3. And it's because I wanted to try something different with book 3. So and started a very interesting way, I guess. But that's kind of what the series became. It outside of my control, but I'll get back to it someday.
Yeah.
I just can't write immediately, which
Yeah.
kind of sucks, but
That's fair. I feel like I have a feeling you're gonna be like Martin Jr. like real soon.
I would love that, you know.
That's
Yeah,
one
let
of
me keep writing.
one of my
Keep
friends said
writing in
that
the
shit.
world, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny because when my friend said that, she's like, she's like, yeah, it kind of feels like Game of Thrones, like kind of thing. And I was like, okay. I was like, I was like, that's a great endorsement. I was like, I haven't read Game of Thrones. I love the TV show. I'm waiting for them to get done. So I guess I should just start reading. But I thought that was a really good ringing endorsement.
Thank you.
My thing is like, I like talking to people before reading their books because I like to get in their mind a little bit more, especially with writing. And now I'm reading people's books, who've had on the show and gotten to talk to them and stuff. And it's like a director's cut, like then when I read, even though I'm by myself, it's not like you're over here, but it feels like it, and it just adds so much to it. And, especially asking about writing ahead of time. So
I always paraphrase this by two things before you read Michael. One, I have a very strong love-hate relationship with my main character for a variety of reasons. Second, my greatest fear is someday someone will be like, oh yeah, because sometimes these authors are be associated with the main characters.
Oh yeah.
I live in fear that people will associate me with Michael because I made him because I thought he was interesting.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see something different. I am so anti what my main character is that like it caught like people who have talked to me off guard. He's like, oh yeah, Michael, and you're just like, wait, you're not anywhere. And I'm like, thanks. Like please don't say we're the same. That would be very, very mean.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. I got this thief and I got these two thieves, and like I hope people associate me with the one but not the other. Like, I think about it all the time. I'm like, and my friend, I was like kind of reading him a excerpt from draft 1, and he was like, yeah. I said, so who do you think I'm more? But he's my best friend. So he goes, oh, you're definitely so and so. I was like, good, because I said, if you thought I was this one, I was like, I just scrapped the book or something. Like, so I was like, I couldn't have people, and I do get that. I have people that I think are gonna look at me weird, and but sometimes people don't get it's just writing,
Yeah.
We got people threatening people online for killing off characters or whatever, putting this person with that person in a romance or whatever. So you never know, right? If somebody associates you with, with your main character.
I live in fear of that, like I said.
That's fair. So this one I'm really interested in. So what are some writing tools or advice that has helped you write your trilogy?
There's always the obvious ones where it's like read a lot, write a lot, and they're like the most boring ones, but they are the ones that help the most.
They're classic tropes, right? Because for a reason.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to beat the classics, but I don't know. I think one of the most useful things for me is that writer's block. When I started to think about rather not being a block, but like there's something wrong in my text that is preventing me from advancing forward in the story. So whenever I feel like I don't know what I'm going to write next, because I'm not someone who, writes like a 50-page outline for a book. I'm much more of like, okay, I have a loose guideline of what I do. I call it road tripping, where
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like you start in New York and you're going to end in California. You're going to go to Detroit and Santa Fe, and let's say like Miami. Like you're going to hit those stops, but you don't quite know the routes you're going to take. That's how writing is to me. And that's how I plan my outlines. My outlines are just like long flow charts, like where it's like it looks kind of like a map. And for me, I always like, if something's not working, I can't advance forward, I got to go back because I know my endings. I don't write a book unless I know the ending of that book.
Okay.
And with the Legacy of the Mercenary King, I planned it in reverse. So the first scene I ever thought of that series was the last one. So I had to find my way back, which was kind of annoying in hindsight, but it worked out. But for writing, it really is kind of like something's not working in the previous scenes. How do I fix it? So I spent a lot of time reading over my initial parts just to figure out, okay, how do I get here? How do I fix this? And sometimes it's simple. It's like, you know what, I didn't do this scene right or something, or I gotta go fix it and I'm done. Or sometimes it's like, you know what, this character just doesn't work. I gotta get rid of them. And that's probably my best tool for writer's block. The other thing, which I hate, this is my like least favorite thing, is I intentionally put my characters in situations I don't know how they're going to get out of.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, it sucks.
I'm
yeah,
like, that's so funny.
And then I'm like, especially since my magic system is more of like, okay, you're gonna have someone with lightning fight someone who can control gravity. How do you win the fight? It puts me into the situations where I'm like, I don't know, but I'm gonna figure it out. So
Yeah.
I fight scenes are like my least favorite and favorite to write, because I'll write the same fight scene like 10 times and I'll be like, all right, this makes the one most sense. I'll go back and add some foreshadowing and stuff to make it more clear. So I don't know if that's advice. Maybe don't do what I do.
But I think it's interesting though, because you do have to put yourself, you have to put your characters in those situations. I think, like, for instance, like, it's not a spoiler because it's going to be my book cover for book one, but like, so I got these two thieves and they have to go after, and they know, right at the start of the book where the item that they want is located. And it's literally in like Gandalf's tower, like a Gandalf Merlin's guy, like tower in the middle of the palace, in the middle of this wealthy district, in the middle of this crazy city. And it's all about, and other people then at the same time like find out about it, so they're literally like dodging people and then they have to get in. And then I was like, well, how would you get into this fortress? I'm like, and I was like, well, there's a feast going on, so you always have more, so like I was looking stuff up and I was like, God, I hope like the CIA isn't like, or NSA isn't, watching me, so it gets kind of hairy when you're looking up like how to break into a secure facility,
I know.
Yeah, but I think it's cool though that you're doing that, because then now you got me thinking, how would you win that fight? Like now it's like really cool.
And stuff like that you kind of have to, because I think one of the things I found in my own writing and my reading as a result is that readers like to feel when the characters are clever. So rather than being like, you know what, two forces that are fighting with like pure tragic strategics, which is more of like a brutality and like overwhelming forces, they kind of like it when like, oh, how does someone with lightning beat someone who can control gravity if it's clever? And that's how they win. It's the same thing of breaking into towers. Like, how would you break into this tower cleverly? Like, how do you do it with it make sounding realistic and like plausible, and also within the realms of the world? So it's fun. It's writing is it's kind of an exercise. It's kind of like a puzzle where you kind of just like arranging things. You're like take it in, but the one thing about writing is you can take out puzzle pieces that aren't working and throw them away. You're like, no one saw that. No one saw that.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, like, because like that's where I'm at with my draft one. For our draft two, I was trying to do something, and then I was like, what is going on here? And I was like, all of a sudden these two characters were like, yeah, we don't belong in this book. And I'm like, yes, you do. I wrote you in this book. I'm like, stay here. And they're like, no, we got to go. We'll be in another book for you, And I'm like, but you're so cool. They're like, yeah, but this isn't our book. And then I'm like, well, whose book is it? Then all of a sudden, like these 5 jerk characters looked at me like, yeah, we're in this book. And they're like, we'll do it. And I'm like, well, now I have to figure out where all of you fit, all these new things. And then this one guy decided to like change me in a constable, and like Rich to being like hard on his luck thief taker. And I had to figure out that whole thing. And my friend, I was like, okay, so what sounds better? I said, this that fit in a nice box or whatever, or this crap over here that's going to take me longer to fix. He goes, oh, that sounds way better. I'm like, of course it does. And he's like, my other friend, Mark Timoney, goes, welcome to being a writer.
That's the one thing I also hate about writing. I say I hate writing a lot, but I think I just do it too much, so I have issues with it. But the thing is, like, it's always that idea of like when you're in farther into a draft and you get an idea where you're like, oh, that would make things more interesting, and then you have that split second realization, be like, oh, if I did this, I would have to tear out like 40,000 words or something. You're like, is this worth it? The answer is always yes, unless it like destroys the book completely. Then you'll write that book. But you're always just like, I don't want to do this. Do I have to? And the answer is always yes. And it sucks, because then you're like, oh, goodbye work I spent 2 months on. Like, let's try this again.
Well, Rob J. Hayes, like, I I don't remember if it was the last book, like book one was Along the Razor's Edge, if it was that the last one he's writing or whatever, or if it was one of them recently. He goes, yeah, I had to throw out like 42,000 words. I'm like, it crushed me because my first draft is like 77,000 words. I'm like, you just threw away like more than half my book, you know? And he's like, yeah, no big deal. I'm just gonna do this. And I'm like, holy moly, like, you know, it's funny when, you know, you say that. It's like, it really does happen though, you know? And it's yeah, it's always interesting. I feel like when you do find that, you know, most times that is the best thing, you know, and clearly there's something trying to tell you that.
Yeah, so I keep pretty intensive track of how many words I throw away per book. Do you want to even guess how much I've thrown away?
Oh man, this is what I get because I teach social studies, so I always make kids guess the statistics. I'm gonna say, is it book 3 or total?
Yeah, book 3. Let's do book 3. Yeah, let's do book 3.
What's the total word count for book 3?
Book 3's total word count was 184, I think.
Ooh, I'm really feeling like, oh man, I know I'm not going to go with my first guess, but I feel like it's going to be right. I'm going to say 78,000 words.
250,000.
Oh my gosh. I was originally going to say 95,000.
Yeah, that book was that's why the book was a monster. I destroyed half. I started it over 3 or 4 times.
Wow, you pulled the Way of Kings. You pulled the Brandon Sanderson Way of Kings.
Yeah, I know. Now I got a novel. Yeah,
yeah.
I just got a novel sitting there. I'm like, this is all terrible words. I can never use any of it.
Oh, that's funny. You know, that's funny that you say that because my friend a while back, I had Kelly McCullough on. He's does the Fallen Blade series. Absolutely love his main character, and he's like a shadow ninja assassin, Liu Kang, if you will, and he's got a shadow dragon, and they use their powers together. Amazing magic system. All right. So he told me that his original story that he wanted to write for book 1 wasn't working. So he decided to let it sit. That ended up later on after he did his webmage series for a bit. They were like, oh, we want something else. So we went to that, and that's where we get the Fallen Blade. And it's changed my life as a writer and a reader. And I think I interviewed him. He said, yeah, I almost deleted it. My friend did the same thing, deleted a book 1. I was like, no, there was so much cool stuff in there. I'm like, what happens when you go back to book 4 and you need something to write after your trilogy? He goes, why are you so upset? I'm like, that could have been the next Dritz Durden or the next Michael or, you know, the next Hound, you know, or somebody. I'm like, and so many people have told me that. So I have a cutaway folder, but I'll just leave everything in there, and, you know, or a bad idea folder or whatever, and go back to it years later. But yeah, it crushed me. I was like, oh no.
You gotta keep those things just in case. You never know when you're gonna be used.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's like my friend said, is, you know, she made a good point. She's like, it's like kindling, you know, you never know, or, you know, extra firewood, you never know when you're going to use it. But yeah. So who are some authors? You obviously mentioned a few books, but who would, you know, you've mentioned books that you enjoy, you know, reading. What are some books specifically that like you read and then you were like, felt the urge to have to go right after that?
So I mentioned that Andrew Clemens obviously was the book that turned me into a reader. Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game. I think it's hard to find someone who wasn't influenced by that book.
That book 1 was so good. I hear book 2 is better. I'm going to read it this summer, but book 1 still. I'm every time I get kids into it, I'm just like, I have a kid reading it right now, and he doesn't want to stop now.
Yeah, exactly. It's a phenomenal book in every regard. I read a lot of Brandon's novel. I did the first book I ever read was him by the Way of Kings. So I just jumped straight into the fire with that series and author. I love his books, and obviously I went back and read all of them, but those books influenced me a lot. The Name of the Wind, I think, also is probably a book where a lot of people are like, yep. A book that I like to say this a lot, the book that actually like changed me as a writer was Robin Hobb and her Fitz books.
Just got done with book 1, yeah.
Those books, oh my god, she's the only author that so her Fitz stories are 9 books long. I own all of the books. They're sitting on my bookshelf. I refuse to read 7, 8, and 9.
Oh, I get that.
For a variety, they're not. It's like they're bad. It's actually the opposite. I don't want to be hurt by her as an author,
and not
so I'm
book
just
9
scared of reading it.
My friend just told me I got to book 9. He goes, I go, are you gonna meet us at the movies? Like, no. I'm like, are you okay? He's like, I can't talk about it. It took him like 3 days to be able to text me back. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, dang. That's where I went and read book one.
Yeah, that's her books are incredible. She was the first author that made me cry while reading. I can tell you exactly what book and what did it. And those books are incredible for so many different reasons. But I joked around with an editor one day being like, oh yeah, I have 7, 8, and 9. And she's like, you're not reading them, are you? I'm like, nope, I'll read them one day when I want to cry. Like I know how much they're gonna hurt me.
Yeah. Plus like John Flanagan's like Ranger Apprentice series. Like I got the first like one I saw it with the main character, Will, get all the way to the last book. And my friend goes, you're not going to read it? I go, no, because I read a blurb on accident, like a review. So I know that this terrible thing happens. And first of all, I don't want the series to be over. He goes, well, there's another series with his daughter. I said, I know, but terrible things happen before that. And I'm like, it really got me through a hard time. And I really like those ones. I'm like, I just can't find myself finishing. I was like, I might never finish the 12th book or whatever. Like, so I totally get it. Yeah.
That's how my dad was with Isaac Asimov. He read all his stories growing up. And then when the last book came out, he's never read it to this day. Yeah. And he's just like, it's almost like how certain authors mean so much to people who read their stories that it's almost like if you read the last book, then there's no more. So you'd rather have the last book unread than not, which is kind of a really beautiful and kind of thing. At least I think it is.
Totally.
This means so much to me. I don't want it to end, so I'm just not going to read it. Which is sad and beautiful at the same time.
I don't know if I'd ever be able to finish. Like I left a bunch of them in between. The Dritz Jordan, like R.A. Salvatore. R.A. Salvatore made me want to write, and like so badly. And you know, I have a few now that I have to get caught up on. But that's a series, you know, where when he says I'm done with Dritz, I will have that book on my shelf, but I probably will never read it. Yeah, that's how I am with Castle, though. I love the Castle TV show. I have 38 minutes in the last episode, and I'm not finishing it. My friend's like, maybe one of these days. I was like, when I need a good cry, I'll do it. But yeah, it's like, I don't want to end. Yeah, it's totally, Robin Hobb's
there's so many authors I could name, but Robin Hobb's a good note to end off just because how much I love her books and love everything she's written.
Her prose, I don't know how to explain it. Like her point of view too. Like it's so existential, I guess is a good. The only way I could think of describe it is like she understands the human condition so well. It's like it's astounding. Like I didn't even really think that. I didn't really like the ending of Assassin's Apprentice as much, but I love the book because I was just like this. It like really made me think. I had to go back and read the last 3 chapters like the second time, and I was like, then I liked it more. But I think I just didn't like it that it ended. Like I just was like, it was one of those things. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for book 2.
Yeah, Robin Hobb, as I could talk about Robin Hobb all day. I love her as a writer, but her 3rd book in that original trilogy was actually taught me so much as a writer.
Okay.
Because I hated the ending. I hate it to this day. I think it is the worst ending possible to a book, but it's the only ending that can happen. And the reason I hated it was I was so emotionally attached to the character.
Oh yeah.
That I didn't like it how it ended. But she's incredible. Like you said, she understands people. I feel like on a level I would only hope to one day aspire to.
Yeah,
she's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, no, totally get it. I know we both are, have only a few more minutes left. But for that last question, do you have any news, updates, promos? Obviously, you got book 3 coming out soon. So do you want to let us know when that release date is for book 3?
Yeah, so my 3rd book, Voyage of the Forgotten, comes out November 1st in the US. Very exciting stuff. I'll hopefully remember what I wrote by the time it comes out. But yeah, other than that, I'm working on this other book that's almost done. I was actually hoping to finish it in April. It's currently sitting at like 135, 140,000. So hopefully I'll finish by the end of this month. I can't really talk about it much other than I keep calling it my fear book.
Oh, cool.
Because it does stuff with fear.
That's
kind
cool.
of the basis of the book is it's based around fear. I really enjoyed it, really liking it. I changed my style completely for this book.
That's cool.
And I currently think it's the best thing I've ever written, which is rare for me to get to the end of a book and not hate it.
That's
So for
fair.
me to still like
What's
it,
that like?
yeah, I know, right? It was a very strange happening. I thought that's the end of every other book. I'm like, I hate it. I don't want to look at Michael or think about Michael for another week
Yeah,
or like
yeah.
a few weeks. In this book, I'm like, yeah, I'm enjoying this. This is good. Why do I feel like this?
That's really cool. I like surprises, so that now I can just like look at Twitter constantly for that surprise. So that's why my wife, she's like, "You are horrible." I go, "Why?" She's like, "You just love surprises." I'm like, "It's the greatest thing." I'm like, I love going
Yeah,
on Twitter and then somebody like you being like, "Hey, here's my new book." I'm like, and just like it changes my entire day and outlook on life. I'm like, today Nick could release his book cover or release his blurb, like title of the book. Like I think if
yeah,
people look at life that way, it's like every day is an adventure.
it
Surprises I
is. It
think are
is.
fun. But yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to seeing that. And I'm
Thank
looking
you.
forward. I've had, like I said, I've had book one since last year and on my Kindle, so I'm really anxious to get it going. And as
Yeah,
soon
I
as I can.
apologize in advance for Michael.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, my friends like said that like for years now, a couple years. I think you read it when you first released book one, and he was like, "Oh my god!" He's like, because he knows I just love interesting characters, and and
Yeah,
he's like, "This is an interesting character," and he's like, "You should read this book just for this character." So
yeah.
I'm looking forward. It's going to be one of my character studies. I like to do them every once in a while, just to try and better myself. So we already have that slotted for me for for my character study when I can get to it. So yeah, so it'd be cool. Well, I really want to thank you, Nick, for coming on. It's been a pleasure. I've, like I said, I've really enjoyed seeing your books shared constantly. So yeah, I really hope that book three is propels even more than book two for you. The cover looks great. Blurb sounds
Yeah, thank
amazing.
you.
Look forward to to getting through that trilogy, and then some point having you on in the future. When you got your
Yeah,
your
that'd be awesome.
next book, if you're not too afraid, get it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been
Yeah,
fun.
yeah. Anytime, anytime. I hope you guys have, a great rest of the day. And I will talk to you on Twitter and I'll email you, everything we need to get going. If you have any questions before that, just let me know, my friend.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, perfect. Well, you have a good rest of the day and I'll talk to you later, Nick.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.